And welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I am your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. Shayne, this was the dagger. We knew it was coming, and it's finally here. The Steelers dropped 5-8 over the weekend with the loss of the Baltimore Ravens, 16-14. It was a game that could have swung the other way, and it's too bad that it had to be decided by a battle of backup quarterbacks. Mitch Trubisky threw the hat trick there, 3 interceptions. And we have to believe that any one of those, if they wouldn't have happened, that could have been the difference in the game right there. Not to mention the blocked field goal.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the story, right? Is just turnovers. We hadn't seen this team turn the football over while they've had success over the past 3-4 weeks. And, obviously Kenny goes down with a concussion. We're going to talk more about that whole situation. But Mitch came in and he did some really nice things. And he did some stuff that has made Mitch kind of the player he's been in the past, where he's very volatile. And sometimes he just throws the ball to the other team. And that's what we got from him this week.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he moved the ball really well. Like, I didn't have any complaints as far as that goes. Found Pickens down the sideline a few times, made some big throws over the middle of the field. But at the end of the day, if you can't take care of the football, you're not going to have a job. And that's where we are with Trubisky right now. Like, that was so disheartening to see that. Some people were kind of making excuses for the first interception. They say, well, Sims ran the wrong route. I think he kind of owned up to it a little bit there. But you still got to see the field. You still got to see that coming. And the fact that, I mean, how's that go? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That was Trubisky on Sunday through that same pattern to Freiermuth the second time, picked off. And then the one in the back of the end zone to Johnson, I'm like, there's a safety over the top. It is great coverage into double coverage to your 5'10" receiver down the field. And a guy that's been struggling, the ball wasn't even close. Like, he didn't even have a shot at it. And so that one right there kind of sealed it for him. So now dropped to 5-8. We're going to talk about Steelers playoff chances here. Things are not looking so hot. Let's go with the winners and losers first. Shayne, go ahead and kick us off. What are our winners from this game?
I mean, it's kind of hard to point at any player in particular and say that they were a true winner. I mean, this is a pretty ugly game across the board for really both teams, except for one real group, which is, the Ravens running back group. We'll talk more about that. But I mean, Pickens made huge plays in this game. I kind of feel like he's a winner for sure. It's just the fact he only got 3 targets is really upsetting, and something else I'm definitely going to talk about later on too. And I think the pass defense, even though we didn't really get many opportunities to see them play pass defense because they just didn't have to throw the football very much, they were very good when given the opportunity to make plays. And I think they kept them in check whenever they did try to throw the football. So those are really the only two where I see like they truly were winners if you want to pick a winner in this game.
Yeah, and there wasn't any of those players that like stand out in a super positive light in this game. There were some good performances. I agree about the secondary. I think that they played pretty strong considering Minkah Fitzpatrick had a few really nice run fits. I remember one of those plays he come up and they thought there was going to be a penalty on the play because he hit the guy so hard and bent him over backwards. We just lost Shayne here. That's all right. I'm going to keep going. But I think that Minkah had a good game. Oh, he's back.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there, but sorry.
No worries there. No worries there. So I think that Minkah had a good game.
In general,
a couple nice run plays. Connor Hayward got in there with a few plays here and there. Freiermuth is always reliable over the middle of the field. And then I think that Pickens would probably be my biggest winner just because you've targeted 3 times, you get 78 yards, and you draw a defensive pass interference that the Steelers were able to just run in with Najee the very next play. Pickens, again, I mean, since that little altercation on the sideline there, has been really good this past week. I'm surprised he didn't get more targets, honestly. And maybe it had something to do with the quarterback change. It kind of threw off what their game plan was going to be. But considering how unbalanced it was the week prior with Deontay getting 11 targets, Pickens only getting 2, I kind of thought that would shift a little bit more into Georgia's favor this week, and still just 3 targets for the rookie. But he continues to impress. What about your losers this week, Shayne?
Let's start with Trubisky, right? I mean, we talked about it. I mean, obviously he has to come off the bench and make something happen. And again, if you take away the 3 interceptions, his stat line looks very, very good. It just, again, the thing that's plagued him his entire career is when he isn't a game manager, when he tries to be more than the guy we saw at the beginning of the season, he turns the football over. He gives it to the other team. And that's kind of the crutch with him is he theoretically is a high upside player. He's got a lot of talent. But anytime he tries to tap into that or try to make the big plays, he gets into these funks where he just starts throwing the ball away, and he doesn't look off defenders. He doesn't read the field well enough to make some of these big decisions in the red zone, and that came back to bite him in this game. I think that's a major issue. The run defense, we'll talk a lot about today, I'm sure. It's just been ugly recently, and especially in this game. I mean, the Ravens just torched us. We had no answer for anything that they were doing. And our running game didn't really come to play either. We didn't get to really lean on it very much. I think it could have been better had we been in a better game script for it, but it didn't produce when we did use it. And then Kenny getting hurt, that's, obviously call him a loser. I mean, he got hurt, but it's one less game of experience he's going to get. And we saw what happened when Trubisky had to go in instead of him.
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of an underwhelming performance overall and not a lot of positives to take away from it, because I didn't think anybody played particularly well. Like you said, the run defense was atrocious in this game. Like, I think that, honestly, I think that the Steelers' defensive line, their interior defensive line, has gone downhill so badly that Montrevious Adams and Tyson Lulu, these are cuttable football players. Like, they're just not good anymore. Unfortunately, Isaiah Loudermilk is not becoming the player that we want at this point in time, at least. And when he does see the field, it hasn't been great results for him either. Now we're going to talk about Chris Wormley here. That's a big one. Then going back to the offensive side of the ball, I agree with you. I think that Trubisky, he has to just be a game manager, because when he tries to do too much, bad things typically happen. And I'm going to date myself here, Shayne, but you probably don't remember way back when the Madden games used to have like the field vision on the quarterback.
Oh yeah, the vision cone. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. You had like the QB vision meter. And I think that if Trubisky was on those Maddens right now, that thing would be so narrow that you would barely be able to fit a player in there, because it just, and I was watching his eyes. I can go back and watch all 22 film.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know exactly what's going through his head, but his head doesn't move. Like, he narrows in on somebody, and that's his guy. That's who he wants to throw to. So a little bit disappointed with his decision-making in that game. Obviously, it really cost the Steelers and probably their season. So not great on that front either. Yeah, and then again, the run defense, man, they're allowing almost 160 yards a game over the last 3 contests and just getting blown over. And J.K. Dobbins, first game back from injury. And so not what you want to see. You were hoping for a little bit better results there. If there's one big area where the Steelers have to improve right now, we know there's more than one, Shayne, but go ahead and give us, what is that one?
I mean, I think the number one thing, and it's just because this is something that I think to a certain degree they should be able to have some control over, is the run defense just they have to become more disciplined. They have to be tougher up front. They can't get blown off the ball. Like, and so a lot of the thing with run defense and what always frustrates me is a lot of it is effort level, right? There's not that many run defenses that just don't have anybody who can play run defense. It's just about, can you get your guys to play in the right gaps? Can you get them to plug the holes they need to? Can the linebackers fill? Like, that's what it's about. Right now, this team doesn't do any of that well. And part of it is the lack of talent up front. We don't have the deepest defensive line like we used to, and you alluded to that. And the guys just aren't playing well, the ones we have. But at some point, you have to have some, honestly, you just have to have some dignity and like be willing to put yourself in a position to play better run defense. And they haven't done that so far.
Yeah, they just seem defeated to me. I agree with that. And I mean, I think there is a talent issue, but there's also an effort issue. And when you get to this point in the season and you're sitting on the record that you have, you wonder how much that comes into effect there as well. This is a matchup that we highlighted last week, and we said this is going to be the key. This is going to be it for the Steelers. If they can slow down the run, we really think that they're going to win this game. If they can't, then who knows what the results will be. And even with allowing 215 yards on the ground, over 5 yards to carry, the Steelers still should have won that game because there was the blocked field goal that we got to assume that Boswell's going to make that thing if Calais Campbell doesn't get a hand on it there. And then the 3 interceptions from Trubisky, 2 of which were thrown inside the red zone or into the end zone. And so big plays down the stretch there that really dictated the outcome of the game. Real quick, Shayne, again, not a great performance, but give us your one player of the game here.
I mean, I really hesitate to pick one player. If it feels like, obviously, like I think Pickens did the absolute most he could have done given his situation, only getting really 3 targets and 4 if you count, like you said, the defensive pass interference call. I think he deserves it. I mean, I think Minka, even though he didn't get a chance to impact the game very much, he was the only guy that to me really showed a ton of grit in the run game because he came up and made some hits. And you saw the hit on Huntley to keep him from getting a first down. Like all those, he does that stuff more and more every year, including last year. So I have to give him some props for that. it's just, again, like this, it felt like nobody really won in this game very much except for pretty much the Ravens run game. Like that was the only thing that truly stood out amongst this entire game.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I would go with the exact same players that you just mentioned. Pickens on offense, just because he was efficient with the limited opportunities that he got. And Minka on defense. I think Minka, it's pretty safe to say that Minka's been the most consistent player on defense all year long for the Steelers. And again, I think he's on track for another all-pro season. That would be the third in his career. So good season from him. Not a good season overall from the team. Let's move on to our next discussion topic. And that is, should the Steelers start considering shutting players down for the season? I know that sounds like a completely irrational thought. There's 4 games left. We've got a month of football. We're still going to play till halfway into January, but we have to look at what's going on right now, Shayne. The Steelers, according to 538, this is mathematically, the Steelers have a 0.2% chance of making the playoffs this year, a 0.2% chance after falling to 5-8. That's not good. If the Steelers win out, Shayne, that number increases to 5%. But that still hinges on what happens with other teams. They need the Chargers to lose. They need the Dolphins to lose. They can't determine their own destiny at this point, not even close. So they need a plethora of things to go their direction. But their chances of making the playoffs this year are almost impossible, And so you hate to see that. And you would like to think that at 5-8, well, if you can get back to 9-8, if you win out, then maybe there's a chance to get in. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case this year. And even the teams in the hunt, like if some of those teams in the hunt step up, if the ones that are currently in the playoff picture in the wild card falter, then it wouldn't matter anyway. So like if a team like the Jets or whatever starts getting hot here, then it's not going to matter. And that's why the percentage here is so minuscule. So what are we playing for now, Shayne? Like you're a Steelers fan. I'm a Steelers fan. We want what's best for the team. What is the end game here? And what is your goal for these last 4 games?
I think, and like the thing that concerns me is I know that the Steelers aren't going to do this, right? Like what I'm about to mention is not going to be what they do. I just can't imagine. But it has to be about evaluating players on your roster that you aren't 100% confident in one way or another, right? That means if Pickett's healthy enough to play, I think he does need to continue to play, right? I'd probably not this week, obviously.
Yeah.
At least I wouldn't. I would keep him out regardless, even if he, passes protocol. He's just had 2 concussions. I'd rather just let him sit for a week at least.
Exactly.
Whatever the case may be with him, I want to evaluate obviously the offensive line needs to stay together. We're not going to sit any of those guys. None of them really deserve to sit anyway. Just anyone who you aren't 100% confident in one way or another needs to play the rest of the season. And it doesn't really matter if they're a veteran player that you're looking to see if you should keep or if it's a young player. That's what you're playing for at this point. What can you find out about these guys going into the offseason? That's going to be a huge offseason, whether we have a high pick or we don't, whatever the situation is, we're going to have to know a lot about some of these players because we need to decide if they're going to be part of the next 3 to 4 years or not. Not a lot of these guys I think will be, but regardless, you need to find out the rest of the season.
Yeah. And it's 4 situations like this where you wish that the Steelers wouldn't have failed on Kendrick Green, wouldn't have had to cut Buddy Johnson. Like they've cut a lot of their mid-round draft picks over the last several years. And you would love to be able to see guys like that come into situations like this where there is no hope for the rest of the season in terms of getting into the playoffs and making a push that way, but you want to look ahead to the future. And they just don't have a ton of guys that you can kind of look forward to and say, maybe this guy can be something for us. Maybe this guy can be a starter down the line. I think Loudermilk is obviously he's going to see more action going down the line. We're going to talk about Chris Wormley here in a little bit. I think DeMarvin Leal shouldn't leave the football field, really, assuming that the knee's good and he's fully healthy. And that goes for pretty much every young player that you have at that point. I just don't, at this point in the season, you've got 4 games left. What is the point of playing Tyson Alulu? Like, what is the point of playing some other football players who A, won't be here next year and B, aren't that good to begin with, dare I say? So I just don't understand why they haven't explored that earlier. Like Mark Robinson, try to get him on the field.
I was about to say Mark Robinson is somebody especially considering the run defense deficiencies we've seen. No offense to Miles Jack or Devin Bush or Robert Swain. I don't need to see any more of you. Like we will obviously, but I don't need to learn anything new about any of those players. We know who they are as players at this point. let's see Mark Robinson. Let's see these guys. Like, there's just no point, and I know it's not going to happen because they're going to try to compete to the very end. It's what makes this team great, but it also what makes this team frustrating in times. We know that's how they're going to do it. So what we're saying right now probably, unfortunately, won't come to fruition. We probably won't see it. But that is what teams that are in the position the Steelers are in need to do and should do at all times. Is you always have to evaluate for next year whenever your season is effectively over, even though they're not going to feel that way until they lose another game, which again could be this week, could be next week, doesn't matter. That's when we could see maybe a shift there where they're truly out. But if they can win a couple more of these next few games, we're not probably going to see this happen until maybe the last game of the year.
Yeah, I think we could see it after this week if the Steelers fall to the Panthers. And why not? I mean, I think it should happen this week personally.
Right.
But
Me too.
Like we said, that's what we want to see. We want to start building towards the future now, because the present, we're not going anywhere. And you'd like to see guys like Robinson and whoever else just get those opportunities. Robinson has barely earned a helmet on game day this year. And so I would like to see that. I want to go a different direction here with this, Shayne, too, though, and something else to root for is, should the Steelers even risk injuries to some of their best players at this point? Like, we're again 5-8, a 0.2% chance of making the playoffs, 5% chance if you win out. Is it worth playing a TJ Watt, for example, who is currently dealing with a rib injury right now, on top of recently coming back from a pectoral tear, arthroscopic knee surgery? Does he need to be out there in this situation, knowing that the 2022 season is essentially over?
I think that with TJ specifically, he's the guy that I think everybody's obviously thinking of right now. Is he obviously is dealing with injuries already, and it makes the most sense for him to sit the rest of the year if we're not going to have any chance, which I wouldn't be surprised if after this game, especially if it doesn't go our way, that he does maybe just get put on IR, right? Like, maybe they're just like, he's banged up, we don't need to see him anymore. But I do think the concern is, and I think this is the one thing the Steelers are going to be concerned with in general, is if they try to sit TJ, if they try to sit maybe Cam, right? If they try to sit some of these guys, how are they going to respond to it? Right. Like, and they're not going to obviously criticize the team outwardly. I don't know what's going to happen, but in the locker room, is it going to create any friction? Are they going to say, I still want to play, I want to be out there? At some point, you have to protect guys from themselves, right? Like, that's something that the Steelers have to do. And Tomlin's done this in the past. I mean, you go back to the Ryan Clark situation where they wouldn't let him play in Denver because of sickle cell. Like, it's a different situation than that, obviously. But he has shown that obviously he is a player's coach and he's going to do what's right for his players. And if he thinks that TJ would be better off sitting, he'll be sitting at some point. Maybe not this week, but moving forward, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that's a great point, though, because these guys are competitors. Like, we know the mentality that Cam Hayward and TJ Watt have. They want to be out there, and if it's up to them, they're going to be out there on the field. But I think that Tomlin needs to make that call, and if he doesn't do it this week, if the Steelers lose, then I think it certainly needs to come by the following week. There's just no point, in my opinion, of risking another long-term injury to one of your best players if there's nothing to play for at this point. It's totally different if the Steelers had a legitimate shot of making the playoffs. They do not. So I think that is something that certainly must be considered. And I would even go as far to say, like, Najee too. Like, do we need to pack on all the extra carries for Najee in these final 4 games here? Or can we really lighten his workload? I'm not saying he needs to be benched completely, but get Warren on the field more often, get Benny Snell out there if you want to. Snell's been fine when he's played this year. Lighten his load so that you don't wear the guy out and that he has something to play for in these final few years with his rookie contract. So we've seen how fast running backs can wear down. I would say that. And again, we alluded to Pickett already. This is two head injuries in 8 weeks. You're more susceptible to concussions once you get them. And now that he's already had 2 in that short span of time, I would be concerned. I think it needs to be a concern not only this year, but moving forward, because concussions can shorten a player's career. And so
for sure.
I definitely agree with you. I personally would love to see Pickett against the Panthers, but I don't think that he should play, even if he's medically cleared, because you just don't know what can happen. One more hit where his head is slammed against the ground again, and he could be out the rest of the season. And this becomes a bigger issue in the future. And so, you definitely don't want that to happen. You need to get your quarterback protected there. And so it makes for a very interesting situation that the Steelers are in this week, to say the least. Tomlin hasn't, as of now, when we're recording this podcast, hasn't determined a starter for this game. He did indicate that Pickett will play if he gets the green light, but we don't know if and when that will be. So it'll be, I mean, I'll ask you this. This isn't on our doc today, Shayne, but who would you go with this week if not Pickett?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So for me, I think the problem is you kind of know who both of these quarterbacks that could play are, right? We know Mitch especially. I mean, he's had plenty of time to show who he is as a player, and he's shown consistently who he is as a player. We know that. Mason hasn't gotten as many opportunities, obviously, but we kind of know what he does and doesn't do well at this point as well. But if you're Tomlin, I think if your goal is still to win games, I think Mason gives you the better chance to win a football game right now, mostly because I'm not as worried about him giving the game away, frankly. Like Mitch is going to make more big throws. He's going to make better plays than Mason probably can. But Mason's probably not going to give the football to the other team 3 times. That's just not really his game. He doesn't try to do stuff that leads to that happening. So if you want more of the style that you were getting from Pickett in terms of just not turning the ball over, right? That's kind of what Pickett had really picked up the past few weeks is he was making bigger plays, but also just not putting the ball in harm's way. Mason will do that for you. So if you're trying to win, I'd probably start him at this point.
Yeah, and Pickett was actually, prior to the injury, he was on the second longest active streak amongst quarterbacks without an interception. So he had quite the turnaround since the bye week in terms of taking care of the football. Who would have thought that week 15 we would be making a case for Mason Rudolph to be our starting quarterback? That's what we've come to right now, and it's a little bit sad, but I agree with you, Shayne. I think that the Steelers should give Mason a look. And again, because first of all, we don't want Pickett to be out there for the sake of his health this week. But I think it makes sense for a couple of reasons. First of all, Trubisky's been bad in terms of his ability to take care of the football and in just the whole sample that we've seen from him this season in general. He was 1-3 as a starter, and that's not counting the collapse this past week because Pickett technically started that game, even though Trubisky is the one that threw 30 passes to Pickett's 1. So I would chalk that up as a loss to Trubisky as well. Trubisky did have the nice second half against Tampa, so I'll give him that. But outside of that, everything has looked really rough from him this year. It hasn't been easy. It hasn't been smooth. The second reason, Shayne, is Mitch Trubisky is due over $10.6 million next year. That is an awful lot of money to pay for a backup quarterback and a backup quarterback who's not performed particularly well. Why not give this shot again to Mason? We saw a lot of Mason back in 2019. We haven't seen a ton from him since then. Give this shot to him. Let him face a little adversity on this short week and not knowing who's going to be the quarterback. If he comes in there and impresses, well, maybe the Steelers, maybe they have a backup that they can go back to. Again, his contract expires after the 2022 season, but maybe he would be worth signing at a fraction of the price that the Steelers would otherwise pay to Trubisky. The Steelers can save $8 million by cutting Mitch during the offseason. So that's something I think that needs to be considered as well. You got to look at the scenario moving forward and which guy you'd rather have as a long-term backup, potentially with money considered, because money plays a big factor there. Shayne, let's talk about another reason to root this year and a reason to potentially shut players down. And that is, I think that the Steelers honestly deserve a top draft choice next year. Like, unfortunately, if you look at the analytics, the Steelers are 19th in DVOA. That's not terrible. But most of their statistics show that they've been a bottom 6 or 7 team this year. And it's not hard to see that it pretty much lines up with what we see on film. And so in my mind, if the worst case scenario is you bench some of your best players to preserve their health, you get younger guys on the field, and you end up losing some football games in the process, I don't think any fan should be too terribly upset with that at this point, considering what we've seen this season and knowing that they can't make a playoff push. And so if that results in the Steelers losing 2 or 3 games down the stretch, then, well, I mean, if Pittsburgh winds up with a top 5 or 6 or 8 pick, that to me is better than winning a few games that are kind of meaningless down the stretch and, say, having the 14th or 18th pick in the draft. I don't think it'll be that late, but right now they're set as the 13th pick in the draft. Even at 5-8, there are 7 teams tied at 5-8 right now. What happens in this next month of football is really going to flip the script on who's picking 4th overall and who's picking 13th. And so I'd rather see the Steelers obviously pick higher if we could. It's not just in the first round, but they'll pick higher in every single round. And so I think that's a factor that needs to be considered.
Yeah, and I think the thing about it at this point, and you kind of alluded to it, is at this point, if you're trying to just go off of, okay, what what's the best outcome for this team at this point? It's not winning out anymore, because before, if we had won this past game, I would say win out because you probably make the playoffs, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
getting playoff experience with this young of a roster and this really honestly poorly built roster as it is kind of right now in some aspects would be huge for telling you what this team could do in the future, even without a high draft pick, right? Now that that's not possible, now that you have, the injury to Kenny and you might need to sit him for a while because of his head and everything else. Now it's just about how can we prepare for next year. And if that's going 1-3, and like I say 1-3 because I still want to beat the Browns for obvious reasons, but outside of that, if
Mhm.
they lose the other games, I'm okay with that at this point. Like I think it's probably best for the future of this team, and I think that it's also best for just making sure this front office and the coaching staff understand where we're at right now. Like we are not a great football team right now, regardless of what our record ends up at the end of
Mm.
the year. We're not probably as good as that record indicates, unless it's 6-11 or something like that. That's kind of where we're at with it at this point.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's the case. Like that, if you needed a win, it was this past Sunday, right then
Yeah,
against Brett Hundley. You're at home. I mean, the Ravens were coming off of a 10-9 win against the Denver Broncos. You needed to beat this team, and they didn't do that. And so the outlook becomes very different now, like because there is no shot at the playoffs anymore. And so I agree with you there. It's not what anybody wants. Nobody wants to be in this situation. Tomlin hasn't been quite in this bad of a situation before either, but it's kind of what we have to root for, unfortunately, I think at this point, because that draft positioning, it can make a big difference there. So I mean, I agree. I think that unfortunately that's kind of where we are right now. Anything else that you want to add on that front? I had another thought and I couldn't remember where I was going with it.
other just wanted to clear up Tyler Huntley for you there, Tommy, just because
Did
you
I say
said Brett.
Brett? I'm sorry.
Which I get it, because Brett, like he's a guy that feels like he pops up every like 2 years as a backup somewhere for the last like
Yeah, yeah,
8 years. But no, yeah, the fact that Anthony Brown also had to come
yeah.
into this game, we couldn't win, also upsets me because
Mhm.
Oregon fans know exactly what I'm talking about, and also Boston College fans. But we're not going to worry about that.
Yes, excuse me, Tyler Huntley. Tyler Huntley
Yeah.
was 1-3 prior to this game.
Yep.
And again, it's too bad it had to be decided by a battle of backup quarterbacks. Not that the Steelers probably would have won if it was Lamar versus Pickett, but I mean, it would have made for a more entertaining game at the
Oh,
very
for
least,
sure.
probably.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, there we are. Let's make an announcement. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, let's get to our game preview this week. Steelers versus Panthers. Pittsburgh opened the week as 1.5 point underdogs. Now 2.5 point underdogs. That line is shifting a little bit more. Could be because of the shaky quarterback situation. I'm not quite sure, but bettors are obviously going the other way with that one. Do you think that's a fair line?
I think it's totally fair, considering the Panthers, one, have far more to play for than we do at this point in time. They are a game out of their division because the NFC South is just bad. I mean, you look at Tampa Bay, who's leading the division in the sense that they're the only team with 6 wins right now. They're not a good football team right now, and it's pretty jarring to watch. Honestly, I'm sure for football fans of the past 20 plus years. Falcons are about to start a rookie quarterback, which who knows how that's going to go. You can't really bank on anything there. Panthers are starting Sam Darnold, who also is just about as unreliable as a rookie quarterback, but they have a good defense. The running game is getting well, so like they have more to play for, right? So they're at home; they have more to play for. They've played good football the past few weeks, 3 out of 4 weeks with a win. Steve Wilkes is coaching for his job, literally like his future position with them as well. Everything is kind of just leaning towards that's the team that has the most to play for, and they're at home. Totally fair line to me.
Yeah, I think that they do. I agree. Is there that division is horrible.
It reminds me of the NFC East of like the mid 2010s of like it was
honestly
just, not good.
That NFC South. It's like, my goodness. You just watched the Bucks last week. The number 1 seed just got absolutely murdered by the 49ers, and that's what's going to be represented in the playoffs. It's sad. It's really sad over there. But I do think that there obviously is more to play for because they're within reach. The Panthers are within reach of that playoff spot. Potentially, if they get some wins here down the stretch. So, interesting there. Interesting. Ola is back, Shayne.
Yeah,
Ola is back this week, and I wanted to throw that in there. The least surprising Steelers move of all time. Malik Reed's got a back injury. Watt is playing with ribs.
Couple Come on,
Ola,
Ola,
then
let's go back.
he gets cut from the Titans, and what do you know? The Steelers bring him in like immediately afterwards, and so I have to imagine he'll see the field a little bit here.
I'm sure. Yeah.
It'll be interesting. I always liked Ola when he was on the Steelers.
Yeah.
I thought he played hard. He was kind of low center of gravity guy and get after the quarterback. So I don't know how much it's going to offer at this point in the season. I do think it's probably an upgrade over the depth that they've had behind Watt and Highsmith. But we'll see what he does these last 4 games and if the Steelers make him a part of the plan after that or not. Let's talk about Steelers injuries this week. And the big one, Shayne, that we've been putting off here, Chris Wormley. It was confirmed last evening that Wormley had suffered an ACL tear. His season for the Steelers is done, and so is potentially his career in Pittsburgh. Wormley is 29 years old. He is not under contract after the 2022 season. What do you think? What do you think the route is for Wormley after this in the Steelers?
I mean, I think it just depends. Like having an ACL tear this late in the season is always difficult because realistically, you're not going to be back until probably deep into training camp, right?
Yeah.
Like ACL tears have obviously gotten to a point where.
Yep, Shayne went out on us again there. I, as somebody who's had an ACL tear myself, it is tough to rehab from. And even if Wormley is back and ready by the beginning of the summer, it's not going to be an ideal situation. And so I think that it's probably in the best interest for both parties to kind of just part ways at this point. I think the Steelers need to get younger on the defensive line anyway. And I don't think that Wormley is that caliber of player where you need to take that unnecessary risk and try to get him back. Although I'm sure the price would be cheap. I kind of just think the Steelers need to move on at this point. Shayne, you keep cutting in and out on us.
Yeah, I don't know. Right? Yeah. I don't really know why my internet's good, so I apologize for that again. But
you are good.
I don't know.
Anything else you want to add with Wormley there?
No, like I said, just the fact I mentioned with the ACL tears, like it's gotten better over the years, obviously, but you're still looking at a late camp edition, probably. Maybe he does come back because he has the familiarity, but it's just going to depend on what his recovery is looking like at that time. So.
Yeah, and there's another name out there the Steelers might want to consider, or probably will consider, and that's J.J. Watt's hitting the market next year. They can get the hat trick with the Watt brothers there. So wouldn't surprise me if Tomlin decided to go that route. Watt's older than Wormley, but it's having a pretty decent season, and so I mean that doesn't seem like very out of character for the Steelers to try to do something like that. He'd be a lot cheaper at this point in his career than he would have a few years ago. TJ Watt's still dealing with the rib injuries here. Yep. I don't think that Watt has been the same player since he came back, really. And it's understandable. I mean, knee surgery, the pec tear, and then now dealing with ribs these last couple of games. And he looks like at times you can see him kind of wincing. I don't think he's kind of running as hard as he normally does. And this guy normally plays his heart out. And not that he's not giving an effort, but you can just tell when Watt is healthy, he is an absolute force to be reckoned with. And we haven't seen that level of TJ Watt back yet since the bye.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just hard to play that way whenever you're coming off like really a major injury and then a knee scope, like you said, that's going to slow you down a little bit, not have quite as much juice. And then again, if you have hurt ribs, just breathing is hard, let alone running at full speed for 30 minutes of the game. It's just difficult. So
William Jackson is the other one. He was technically able to be activated off IR last week, wasn't yet. It's just such an interesting decision. I mean, it's just a late round pick swap, so it's not that big of a deal. But the Steelers will have to eat some dead money because there's no way they're keeping him at his cap number next year. So Jackson's going to be cut. So if he doesn't get back here on the football field and really soon, and at this point, I mean, it's like now hindsight being what it is, Steelers essentially knocked out of the playoffs. I don't see a lot of reason to do that. I said that at the time. And back when the Steelers did still have a slight chance to fight their way back in it. But I mean, right now you've got a 30-year-old cornerback who's been on IR, who's going to be fresh off an injury. So it's going to take him some time to get up to speed with a brand new defense. And because he's had a back injury all this time anyway, I don't know if they'll get anything out of him this year or much at all.
Yeah, well, that's the concern. Is like I think for me, like getting him on the field at some point is good, just because he's going to get cut. But do you want to maybe bring him back on a smaller deal?
Yeah.
And if you get to see him play with this defense at least a little bit, you can at least evaluate kind of where he's at right now, and he'll get a chance to get acclimated a little bit. But that's really all this is at this point is, are you going to bring him into camp next year after cutting him? Like, that's pretty much what and does he want to come back? Because he obviously seemed interested in playing for us, but he knows he's not getting paid that much. I think he knows that too. So it's going to just be what he wants after the deal is done and they cut him from his current one.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be the case as well. Although I don't think personally that I would want William Jackson as anything more than a reserve boundary cornerback, because I just don't think that he's that starter quality, at least what we saw from him in Washington at this point in his career. In his younger days, yes. Let's get on, Shayne, to our matchups to watch this week. I think the biggest one, and we've talked about Dan Moore a lot this year because I think he's one of the weaker links on the Steelers offense. But now we get Dan Moore against Brian Burns, who's got 10.5 sacks this year, a quick, fast, bendy pass rusher. I can see him giving Dan Moore some fits this game and maybe having a couple really quick wins against him.
Yeah, again, it's just we've kind of determined, and it's good that we determined it this year because I think that the tackle class and just the ability to upgrade a tackle was definitely there this year coming up. But he's just not a starting caliber left tackle. He just doesn't do anything well enough to warrant that. I think he's fine as a swing tackle. He's got now a lot of experience, which is great for future. But we need to upgrade at tackle, and I think that this is going to be one of those games that makes it pretty clear to everybody that we need to. So, unfortunately.
Yeah, is there anything that Moore can do at this point to change your mind? Like, what kind of 4-game stretch would he have to say that's our left tackle of the future?
He would have to make Brian Burns look like a guy that just came off the street. Like, that's pretty. Like, he'd have to basically do that, which that's not obviously going to happen. Nobody.
I agree with you because even one good game against a player like Brian Burns, it's not going to convince me because of the 2-year sample now that we have of Dan Moore. And again, he's still a young guy, but I think that he could be a great swing tackle. I just don't want him as the future starting left tackle. It's not a position you should cut corners on, really. It's too important. So that's a big one to watch this week. Another one I think would be Najee against the Panthers defensive line. Panthers aren't a particularly great run stopping team, but they do have a big guy up front in Derek Brown, and they are capable of holding teams in check. And so this Steelers team did not do well running the ball against the Ravens on Sunday. Najee averaged 2.8 yards a carry. So I want to know, and I got to see, is what we've seen from Najee since the bye, is it because Najee is a new and improved player, or is it because they played the Saints and the Falcons and some very susceptible teams here? Like, I want to see that consistency from Najee down the stretch. And it's not just him, it's the offensive line as well. And we all know that the running back goes as the offensive line goes. So the collection of the running backs and the offensive line, they've got to keep that run game consistent. They can't put up these goose eggs like this and just have certain games, 1 out of every 3 games or whatever, where there's just no run game to rely on at all.
I think for me, like, obviously the Panthers defensive line, they have big guys in that group, but I think that they need to focus on opening up holes off tackle for him, because when he gets ahead of steam and can get through the line and has that build up speed through the line, that's when he can start to run over players to make guys miss in the open field. That's where we've seen the most success for him from as far as a couple of the big plays he's made since the bye, especially. That needs to be where they attack. Derek Brown is not somebody you want to run at right now. He's had a very, very good season. If you can avoid him, run at Brian Burns, right? That's what you can do to Brian Burns, run at him. If you can do that, they'll probably be fine. But I'm hoping that they're not going to try to go too far outside on like the toss sweeps or too inside where you have to deal with Brown on a consistent basis. So there's a balance there for sure.
Yeah, he is that type of runner where you do want to see him get a little bit of a build up there so then he can make something happen with it. Not necessarily elude the defender, but run through him, stiff arm, that kind of stuff. That's Najee's game.
He can stiff arm.
Oh, he loves the stiff arm. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this week. And again, I don't know, these last couple of weeks it's just interesting that the Steelers have not had, maybe, I don't know if you would say, a more balanced approach. 12 carries for Najee last week, only 3 for Jaylen Warren, 2 for Benny Snell. So I guess it's all right. It's an all right balance. I'd like to see Warren get a little bit more, especially considering that, again, he's been very efficient this year. And so since that hamstring injury, maybe they're just trying to take it easy on him. I'm not really sure what's the case, but hopefully for a little bit more run success this week. And the other matchup I highlighted here, Shayne, is the Panthers rushing attack against the Steelers defensive line. One that I think would have been a lot scarier had Christian McCaffrey still been on this Panthers team, because McCaffrey is playing really well right now. But it'll be interesting to see if they can keep him in check, because the Steelers are having trouble keeping anybody in check right now on the ground. Their interior defensive line is just getting bullied. And watching like Tyler Linderbaum it just made me want to pull my hair out because
I know.
I knew that the Ravens were getting a good player when Linderbaum fell into their lap. And we got this one of the best center prospects we've ever seen. And of course, he goes to Baltimore, which is just a perfect fit for him in a run-heavy offense. And so he stuck it right to the Steelers' nose tackles last week and opened up some huge running lanes. But I don't want to see the same thing happen with the Panthers offensive line bully and the Steelers defensive line this week.
No, and I think that unfortunately the Panthers, all their running backs have had pretty decent success this year when given.
Yeah, they have.
It's like Deontay Foreman's been great for them. Like it's just in general that's what they're leaning on right now. I mean, Sam Darnold had to have like I think 120 passing yards last week and they scored 30 points. Like it's just they don't need him to do much, and that's kind of why they've been able to be successful is they're not allowing the quarterback to make the mistakes, right? And that's actually like the thing I want to see and what I'm interested in matchup wise is Sam Darnold versus the playmaking secondary, right? We're the number 2 team in turning the ball over as far as interceptions go this year in secondary, something we haven't seen from this team in a while. Yeah. We can force turnovers, but are they going to even let Sam have the opportunity to, turn the ball over? They're going to allow him to throw enough where he has the opportunity to make those mistakes. That's what the defense has to force. They have to force him to have to make some plays for them to sustain drives at this point.
Yeah, because we know that Darnold is very Trubisky like that way, where you can get him to make some bad decisions with the football, and I don't think that he sees the field particularly well either. But yeah, it's all about the opportunity because they were able to just pound the ball on the ground last week. And I have a feeling this could be a very demoralizing game for Steelers fans where Carolina's offensive line just has their way with them on the ground. And it's just one of those type of games. I'm hoping it's not. I want to see a better contest than that and not one because getting run, there's nothing worse than just getting run on for 5-6 yards a chunk. I know. So we'll see what happens this week. Let's get to our key to victory. If the Steelers do one thing well, I will start it off, Shayne, so that you don't take mine this week. I'm going to say they got to stop the run. And I don't know how they're going to do it. I honestly, I don't know if they have the personnel to do it or if they just need to get more aggressive in terms of linebackers coming downhill like Vince Williams used to do every play. But they've got to try to do something to neutralize this rushing attack, this Panthers rushing attack that's been really good. And so if they're able to do that, they certainly give themselves a chance in this game. Make Darnold pass the football. That's what you want. That allow your edge rushers to get after him. And if they can do that, it certainly could be their game this week. And if not, then it's going to look probably much like the Ravens game did last week.
Yeah, and again, I get that. That's definitely the number one thing I think that you have to look at, both based on how we've played and how the Panthers are trying to win games. It's not a great matchup for the Steelers, so something has to change there. And honestly, to me, what I would do personally, now I know it doesn't really work this way necessarily, but I'm putting 8 in the box from the first play, and until they prove they can beat me in the passing game, I'm not taking that 8th guy out of the box. It just isn't going to happen. Like, I don't care. Minka's going to play deep. Minka will play deep safety. We'll have our 2 corners, in press man coverage, and show me you can beat me. If you can't, then we'll win. I don't think they'll do that. Obviously, it's not really how the Steelers handle this type of thing, but I think that would be the way to just make the Panthers have to adjust, right? Because right now they don't have to adjust. They're just running the football. They're hoping to sustain drives. If they don't, they make their defense go out there, and so far it's worked out for the most part. You can't let them do that against us because they very well can win that way. Outside of that, I mean, we have to sustain drives, not only sustain drives, but we can't turn the ball over. That's why I think Mason should be the quarterback in this game if you're still trying to win games, which we know Tomlin is. We know they're still going to try to win out, even if it doesn't help them really at all. So I think if Mason plays, I think they'll be able to avoid the turnovers, but you're probably not going to get a lot of opportunities in this game. They're probably going to have high time of possession. That's how they win. That's how they're trying to win. You have to make good on the opportunities you get, and we didn't do that last week, and that's why we lost.
Yeah, turnovers are going to be huge, especially in a game like this. I don't see it being some high-scoring affair. It's probably going to be one of those slugfest type games again, and so even being +1 in the turnover department could make the difference in a game like this. So let's go ahead, Shayne, and we'll sign off with our game predictions here. Go ahead and give us your prediction for Sunday, Steelers versus Panthers.
So I got 24-21 Panthers. I think that there's going to be some late scoring in this game that kind of finish things off. I could see the Panthers being up 24-14, honestly, especially if they have a good second half running the football. We've seen how this team plays in the second half recently. Not so great. I wouldn't be surprised if we get down and then we do have to try to kind of make it a game at the end, like we did against the Ravens last week. And we get close, but just can't, finish things off and can't get the ball back, probably because the team can't stop the run again, unfortunately.
Yeah, Shayne, I'm going to go with the gut feeling this time again, and I'm going to go opposite of you. I've got Steelers winning 20-17. I do think it is one of those games that should essentially be a pick 'em, come down to between it. But again, it's going to who was that quarterback matters, because it depends on how many practice reps they're getting, what's going on with Kenny and concussion protocol. And so I obviously would feel more comfortable saying Steelers if Pickett had not had this concussion. He had the full week of practice. We don't know exactly what the situation is going to be. I don't believe that there's a ton of difference between maybe all three of them right now. Obviously, we hope that Kenny is going to be a lot better than either of them. But I do think that it's probably just going to be one of those close type games. Tomlin will maybe get his guys coached up for this. Steelers are 6-1 all time against the Panthers. It just seems like one of those games that the Steelers will win. And maybe because I'm not particularly excited about them winning this week either. So I don't know, just a gut feeling for me this week. I do think that the Steelers will do a better job containing the Panthers. I still think it won't be great, probably something to the tune of 4.5, 4.8 a carry, but holding the red zone, kind of like they did last week, which might be good enough to for the Steelers to get up their usual 20 points, and that'll do it. So that's our predictions for this week. Thank you for joining us on the Still Curtain podcast today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. And thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.